Effects of poverty on population. Effects of poverty on population are many. The poor people have to suffer extraordinary living conditions, they do not have access to a good education system, they do not get the basic health facilities, and the worst is that they face problems in finding food, shelter, and clothing for themselves. Effects of poverty on population growth. The debate on the effects of poverty on population growth has long been a hot topic among scholars and intellectuals. As a result, much attention has been focused on this topic in hopes of finding ways to eradicate poverty. This leads many amateur experts to jump into the situation and voice their opinion on it. However, while some of these people may have good intentions, they do not fully comprehend the complexity of this issue. Understanding the effects of poverty on population growth can help policymakers develop effective strategies to alleviate the problem. While most people living in extreme poverty are too busy trying to survive to think about getting married and having children, those who can afford it have effectively more time to reproduce. The resultant higher growth rate of poor countries contributes significantly to the global burden of extreme poverty. Effects of poverty on population education. Inequality of income leads to differences in wealth and disparity of access to resources such as food, shelter, health care, and education. Education is considered an important tool to improve the lives of people, so it is especially important to consider poverty when examining population education. Poverty severely affects population education. It creates a situation where the poor remain uneducated. Poor people rely on loans giving high interest to survive. Loans given by the poor people become unserviceable, and after a period of time when money is not available for payment, this leads to poverty and ultimately can cause people to die due to starvation. Effects of poverty on population. Effects of poverty on population in developing countries. The effects of poverty on the population in developing countries are severe. In some areas, over 50% of the population derives its primary income from small-scale agricultural production. Poverty is not just an issue of income but also an issue of social status and general well-being, which affects health and quality of life. It encompasses a lack of education and ability to participate in political decisions and can lead to social ills like crime, child exploitation, drug or alcohol abuse, prostitution, and the breaking up of families. UNDP, 2000. According to the World Bank, developing countries are typically characterized by a high percentage of the population living in poverty. Poverty is characterized by a lack of material resources and scarcity of human capabilities. While most of the world's very poor do not live in extreme absolute poverty, which is a living condition that fails to provide minimum requirements for food and shelter, almost half of them live under conditions of moderate to extreme relative poverty, which does not even meet basic needs. Effects of poverty on population in developed countries. Effects of poverty on population in developed countries, including the U.S. In order to determine the effects of poverty on the population, we gathered research from various books and magazines. There doesn't seem to be a correlation between poverty and population growth in developed countries, but it is more significant to developing countries. We conclude by showing that illiteracy is one of the main reasons for high birth rates in these countries, according to our extensive literature report. The effects of poverty on population vary according to country and circumstance. In developing countries, living in poverty is a major source of illness, with the infectious disease being a major cause of death. About 80% of the world's 780 million undernourished people live in developing countries. Without access to safe water supplies, adequate sanitation facilities, proper housekeeping, and pest control, poor people are vulnerable to disease when infectious diseases are prevalent. In these countries, most children do not reach their 5th birthday because of infectious diseases, many of which can be prevented or treated by relatively inexpensive means. Outbreaks can also occur in developed countries where they were once believed to have been eradicated. For example, tuberculosis was once considered a disease of the past. However, increased immigration and drug-resistant strains have created an epidemic in some areas that were previously unaffected by this illness. Additionally, in developed countries, the hepatitis B virus is becoming more prevalent due to the high proportion of people born outside the region and the use of intravenous drugs among sections of the population. Rubella poses another risk for pregnant women who may pass on congenital defects to their children if they become infected during pregnancy. Effects of poverty on population in urban areas. Poverty has many effects on the people and population in urban areas. The causes of poverty can be broken down into three different categories: allocation, cultural, and psychological. The following outline will cover such things as how effects vary between population groups, the ways in which different sectors of the economy are affected by poverty, the effects that poverty can have on individual families and lifestyles, and how higher rates of poverty can lead to a breakdown of communities or an increase in crime. When there is an economic depression, people suffer. When poverty happens in urban areas, some effects are shop owners that cannot afford to stay open, people that need a place to stay because they are bankrupt and homeless, the unemployment rate is high, schools aren't attended as much, children who go to school hungry or don't feel like going because of how poor they are. Some ways to curb the problem are to make sure that the farms do not foreclose on their homes, try to get jobs that have just opened up, raising funds for better schools. Effects of poverty on population in rural areas. There are many effects of poverty on the population in rural areas. First and foremost, most people who live in poverty have no access to clean drinking water, poor sanitation, and basic health services, which often results in illness and death. There is little hope for escape from poverty. About 1.5 billion people live on less than $1 a day, McKinsey. The World Bank concludes that 80% of the world's population lives on less than $10 a day. This means that they struggle to satisfy basic needs like getting enough food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Rapid economic growth has meant an improvement in living standards for many of the world's poorest people. But 2/3 of the world's 1.4 billion poorest people still reside in rural areas, McKinsey. Effects of poverty on animal population. Poverty is causing a severe decline in the animal population of one of the poorest countries on Earth. This country is Somalia, and the decreased animal population has resulted in poverty-stricken people having to kill their pets, livestock, and donkeys for food since they have no money to buy food. To help with this problem, the United Nations is working to give these people regular food rations that are meant for humans to keep them from killing their pets, livestock, and donkeys. The purpose of this will be to save these poor animals from premature death so that they can live longer and produce more animal offspring, which will increase the animal population. Effects of poverty on birth rates. Poverty is a fundamental reason for the observed high birth rates in developing countries. Poverty arises due to a host of interrelated factors, including but not limited to lack of education, poor infrastructure, lack of medical facilities, and lack of money. Such conditions affect not only birth rates but also the health and well-being of mothers and children, causing pregnant women to deliver their babies in unhygienic settings and increasing the mortality rate of young children.